So the focus of this series has been looking at the decisions that we make when we have conflict or how we respond to conflict. And my hope has been to help us really be clear about what are the choices that we make typically when we have conflict, to help us kind of connect the dots between the choices we make and what actually happens when we have conflict. And again, my hope is that in showing that we can actually learn from what happens, from our choices. Because I think learning is crucial to making change. It's crucial to taking responsibility for ourselves, and it's crucial for a healthy relationship, and it's absolutely necessary for doing repair. And I'm going to do a really quick, brief review. Kind of talk about one thing I didn't talk about last week, and then we're going to jump into repair. And you guys are going to get to practice some. We're going to do a lot. If you would mind, Patty, would you mind handing these out on this side? Andrew, would you mind handing these out on this side? And then here's two sets, actually. Here's Andrew, here's two sets too. Let me give Andrew one here. He's probably got one of these. The graphic that you're going to get, let me just hold that up, okay? This graphic is just, typically when I do this class, I use this model as the sort of structure of the class, and it really helps understand the dynamics of what happens when people have conflict. I didn't use that this time, but I just thought it might be helpful for you to plug in what you have learned. This second sheet it's a format for learning. You need two more. There's a box over there, and it's right in there. We have some. Oh, we have some here, Andrew. You need those? That it? Okay. This is what we're going to use tonight to sort of go through conflict and help us ask ourselves some questions to actually do the repair. So hold on to that one. Okay, so I'm going to do a really, really quick review. And probably most of the night you're going to spend with your group. So we're going to break into groups. And we'll go from there. But you're going to spend a lot of time with your group. So basically, I'm going to just write out the categories of what we've talked about. And then I'm going to ask your group the question. So the first thing we talked about was the what and the how. The second thing we talked about was comfort strategies. The third thing we talked about was implicit beliefs. And the last thing we talked about was making other people the problem. So what I'd like you to do is break into your groups. And I want you, first subject we'll talk about is, what do you remember about the what and the how, what was helpful to you, maybe even what you didn't like about it or disagreed about it. But I'd like you to kind of have a conversation about that with each other and talk about what you remember, what you learned, what was helpful, or what you didn't like. So go ahead and break into your groups and do that. So why don't you do a group right there? That's okay. That was helpful in terms of understanding the what and the how. Okay? How about we start this group?
More how than what?
More how than what?
A lot more how.
A lot more how. Okay, and something else from your group?
No.
That was it? A lot more. Underline. Okay. How about this group here? Well, that's what we talked about in terms of implicit, but yes, that is absolutely true. We don't see it. Yes. So like a lot of it's, would you say it's invisible? Or just we don't? Yes. Yes. So I'm often blind to it. Okay. Okay. So we got one more from this group about the what and the how.
It is 90% the how and 10% the what.
Yes. We can round it off to that. 90%. Oop. 10% what, 90% how. Something like that. It's actually 7 to 10 and 90 to 93. Somewhere in that part. So, what's the significance of that?
You're so busy reacting and unconscious of your reactions that you get in a big conflict without actually really dealing with the actual conflict.
The subject.
Correct.
Yes. So the conflict isn't really about the subject so much, it's about how we interact with the subject.
Yes.
Okay, good. That's significant. Cool, very good. How about this group? All that stuff? Ditto, ditto, nothing new? Okay. What about this group?
Yeah, I think we agreed with the how is the big proportion of it. That we see it in conflict situation. You can see somebody who is using the how more, that it's more effective. People that pay attention to the how, it's a better outcome.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean personally, but I think you're saying that also just observing other conflict, how other people, what strategies they employ.
Okay. Okay.
Anyway, the other thing I would add to it is just the understanding of what process is.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Process is the combination of the what and the how. It's the totality of everything that goes on. It's the subject we talk about, but it's how we talk about the subject. Very good. Okay. Then we talked about comfort strategies. So how about we do this as your group? We talk about, I'm not really interested in listing them so much. I mean, if you want to talk about one that you use and what you see about it and learn about that yourself, that would be really good. Share that in your group. You can share it with the larger group. Talk about what you think they're about and what you've learned about comfort strategies, and share two things with the larger group when you got all done. Okay, does that make sense? Why do we use comfort strategies? What happens? That kind of stuff. And if you want to talk about one that you've recognized in yourself and what you've learned from that, that'd be great. Okay. So tell us what you learned about this group here. You're first this time. Tell us what you learned about from our talks here, what you learned about comfort strategies and what you want to share with the rest of the group. Because when you teach it, you learn it. So I'm giving you opportunities to share what you've learned here.
That we use our strategies to comfort ourselves. The overall goal is to be comforted.
Yes, the goal or the intent is comfort. Good. Very good. Anything else? One more, we got to share one more piece here. Each group shares 2 things.
Well, this is something you've actually told me personally that I shared with my group, but I asked you once because I'm a fixer, well, is that really a bad thing? As a mom in a relationship, I have to manage the family, I have responsibilities, etc. And you shared with me that it becomes a problem when the basis is fear, when you are using it to manage your comfort, not just take care of the family.
Manage your own fear.
Manage my own fear.
That's right.
Yes.
So becomes a problem when we are trying to manage our own emotions. Okay, very good. How about this group?
Sure, I basically laid out the way I see myself, maybe right, maybe wrong, is that I'm someone who likes to control a situation, who likes to manage what's happening.
Yes.
And I use intimidation. I don't get big and scary. I try to just be the rightest person in the room,
Yes.
the smartest, the most right person,
The most correct.
the most correct.
Yes.
That's my method
Yeah.
from what I see.
Can I ask you a question?
You can.
So what happens? What's
So what
the consequence of that?
Oftentimes people get pissed off that I'm trying to control them.
So people don't respond
They
well.
don't respond well to that.
Okay.
Right? And yeah.
Do you have a sense of what actually happens inside it to you before anybody else responds?
No, I think I have a big fear for not being right.
Okay.
So for me, that's if I'm not.
So if you go ahead.
Yeah, not being right.
So if you're putting yourself out there as somebody who's right, you're kind of afraid you're not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Anybody else in this group?
I think I like the way Andrew summed it up, the idea of conflict, because we talk about comfort strategies, but I'm always trying to think of, so when does that happen? And the idea that when we try to control things that feel out of control, then that's when we tend to just fall into our comfort strategies.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Okay. How about this group? Would you guys ditto again?
No. So we were kind of talking about how the basically the comfort strategies are how you're manipulating the how in the process. So like your comfort strategy is how you're trying to manipulate the situation, right?
Trying to manage what happens?
Yeah, which is
Okay.
kind of ends up,
Okay.
which is the 90 to 93%. So
Correct.
it's like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then we're talking about kind of like how like learning about the comfort strategies helps us like have responsibility like in our own situation. So like learning about them can help us either catch ourselves when we're in the midst of doing it, or be able to like know that, oh, this is a way that I react. So after conflict, be able to like apologize or something like that, because
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know like, oh, this is a comfort strategy that I fall into,
Okay.
or something like that. So you can kind of be more aware of like your actions.
Okay.
And like you can't just be like, oh, it happened. You're like, oh, I did that.
Okay. So the focus, one of the focuses that you're talking about is that you are recognizing that you're making real choices that matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that, yes, I think that was, is that the kind of the focus you're talking
Yeah.
about? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So our choices have consequences. Okay. Good. Very good. What about you guys? You're it, Jays.
Um, Yeah, I mean, we just talked about the strategies that, so we had withdrawal was one, and then getting big was the other.
Right.
And I guess for getting big, it was just a motive would be winning. I think I mean, that was mine.
Yes.
So getting angry and kind of imposing
Yes.
on the other person rather than really wanting to know what their really real feelings are.
Yes.
So
Okay. Okay.
There we go. And just what we had talked as well is about the desire to want to regain control.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
Yes.
pretty much it, as
Yeah.
a reason for why using the comfort strategy.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so what happens when you're not in control?
You use a comfort strategy.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Well, our belief is that something bad's going to happen. It's underlying that is fear.
Right.
Generally speaking. Yeah. What's that?
I would fall under the category of being complicit.
Yes.
And along those lines, probably one of the reasons of being complicit is you just shut down and you stop it. So
Yes.
if you're not fighting, then somebody can't fight with you.
That's right.
So you can get big all you want, but if I just back away, then,
Yes.
it takes two people to argue.
Yes. But what happens inside of you?
Well, that's another issue.
Yes. That's a real consequence, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's part of what I'm trying to help people understand is that when we make choices, even before anybody responds to us, we experience consequences. And the consequences of using self strategies or comfort strategies is that we actually create more pain for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Always, always, always.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So you get to be alone, you take away your voice, you become resentful,
Exactly.
all that stuff.
But
Even
I guess
before.
in the meantime, you think, okay, I can handle it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can deal with it.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Until you die of a heart attack one day.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts about any of that? Okay, the next thing we talked about were implicit beliefs.
One thought, just thinking at some other point, like it would be interesting to hear. This is probably a sidebar conversation, but how do you get somebody to think this through without, walking them through something like this? What's the manner in which to be able to have this to facilitate a conversation to be able to be helpful?
Well, I in terms of how do I do that, or just how do you do it as a person? I try to ask a lot of questions.
Sure.
Like, well, what happened then? I'm interested in what happened, but I also want them to see what happened. And asking that kind of question can be really helpful. So what did you want, or what happened when you actually did that? How did this other person respond to you? People are always interested in talking about how the other person responded. And then I can say, well, what happened inside of you, kind of thing.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of a process there.
Yeah.
And I handed out that format for learning, and it has that process kind of going
Gotcha.
through it. Any other questions? Okay. So the next thing we talked about was implicit beliefs. So get into your groups again and talk about what you learned about implicit beliefs. And then when we're done, I'm going to share one thing about implicit beliefs that we did not talk about last week that was important. And I forgot about it.
I think he was asking a different question.
Joe?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think he was saying.
Let's bring it back up. So this group gets to be first this time. So we're talking about implicit beliefs. So talk about what you learned about implicit beliefs, what they are, how they work, that kind of stuff. Yes. Your turn.
So for implicit beliefs, so I'm going to try to do my best in channeling her because she was the one who explained it to me, and I wasn't here last week. But I
Oh.
believe implicit beliefs is like something. Is it like kind of like a worldview that we have, or the implicit belief goes against the worldview?
Not always, but
Not
can.
always,
Yes.
but can. Okay. So,
So
like
can someone help? What's your
Gabe.
name? Gabe?
Gabe.
Can someone help Gabe with defining what an implicit belief is?
That fear that you have,
A fear you have?
like a belief of what will happen, even if it's not necessarily logical.
You're close. You're good.
From what I remember, you were talking about having a world view or a belief, like say that you don't care that what people think of you,
Correct.
but the way you act goes against that because you try to make people like you through the way you act.
That's right.
Sort of.
That would be an example of having an idea or worldview that doesn't really matter to me what people think, but having another kind of belief, an implicit belief that actually shows up when I have a conflict of do people like me or not. So I act from a belief on a different level. Okay. So let me kind of give a short definition. An implicit belief is a belief that I learned from experience. It's not a belief that I learned from going to school. It's different than having a worldview like, how does reality work? Does God exist? What's God like? Is he good? It's not that kind of thing. It's a belief that I learned from experience that it has to do with me and how I think about myself, or what I believe is true about myself. And sometimes it can be in conflict with my worldview and sometimes it's not. That's an implicit belief. Implicit means subconscious. Explicit would mean conscious, like worldview would be conscious. Okay. Okay. So what do you guys talk about?
Well, I think I said basically where a lot of where I come in conflict with myself is I in the past had experienced some level of discomfort from opening up and like perhaps like asking someone or being open and then having them tell me a certain thing.
Yes.
Like for example, like today, like I had to drop a class from UVO, and like I was worried about telling my parents because I thought that they would like judge me for that.
Yes.
So I think a lot of I could basically make it easy and just tell them.
Yes.
But that's where the conflict happens because I'm afraid of telling them.
Yes.
If that makes sense. Yes.
So the implicit belief would be, if I do something wrong, I'll get judged.
Yeah. Basically.
Okay. Good. That's a good example. Good. Joe.
Is that different? Like, so I see how that works in the developed. I see how that works in the developed. Is that different for the innate hardware definition for an implicit belief?
It is different from, I have it different on the map, in a different category. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It is developed because it's stuff that I learn as I grow up from experiences that I have. Yeah.
So are these all in this personal map? Are those all implicit beliefs? Or is an implicit belief just the things that I learn from my
implicit
life
belief is the thing that I learn about myself from life experiences,
okay.
Usually painful ones.
Cool.
So what did you guys talk about in terms of implicit beliefs?
Just what it was. We weren't here. I wasn't here last week.
Oh, okay.
But it was pretty close to what we were hearing.
Okay.
But just had a question. I mean, if there's the bigger the conflict between your worldview and your implicit
Yes.
beliefs, is that you're like the more messed up person?
No, it just means I have work to do, because we all have conflicts between what we believe and how we act sometimes.
Yeah.
And most of the decisions that we make when we have conflict are based on implicit beliefs. It just means that we have a conflict between our worldview and what we actually believe.
But is that the repair is coming more your implicit more in sync with your worldview? Is that, or your world?
Is the implicit more in?
Yeah, I mean, would you be more integrated, say, and more
Oh, sure,
authentic
absolutely.
or something if your implicit really aligns with what your explicit?
I think what happens is I discover that I have conflict and that I have some implicit belief that's being played out, that's contradicting my worldview. So I figure that out. I learn about that. I work through that. I mean, that's very simply put. I work through that, how I came to believe that. In some cases, when I was a child, that implicit belief was true, but is it appropriate now?
Mm.
And it usually in the present, it gets in the way, and it's actually not accurate or not true. In some cases it is, but it can vary between person to person and how they're interacting with me. So if I'm married and I'm acting on a belief that isn't true and isn't appropriate for my relationship with my wife, it's going to get in the way of the relationship. And I don't want that. So I need to do the work of actually working through that belief and figure out where and give myself, we're going to talk about the repair piece and how to do that in a minute. Okay, so let me grab this. And how about this group here? You're the spokesperson, Paul.
I guess so.
Everybody's intimidated by you being right, so
I know.
you just go, girl.
Okay, we'll do that. We talked about the implicit belief being the thing that drives the comfort strategy we use.
It is. It is. Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah. So that's where we started.
Yes. That's very important.
And in my example, the implicit belief is a fear of not being right that causes me to want to be, to project that I'm right.
Or what I think will happen if I'm not right.
Right.
Yes. Or if I'm wrong. Yes, exactly.
I think that's good.
Good. How about this group? Why don't you? Yay, Trish, go for it.
So we talked about implicit belief as a narrative that we tell ourselves.
Okay.
So it's like you have the things that you believe, but then you have the story that you're telling yourself about yourself and who you are and what you're doing, and that it is very easy and natural to bring other people into that story in accordance with the story that you're telling you about you.
Yes.
And so you interpret everything that they're doing in accordance to the story that you're already telling yourself.
Yes.
About yourself.
That's very good.
So we talked about like a parent who is really hard on you about something, and so you tell yourself, I'm a failure at that, I'm a failure at that.
All right.
And then anything that anybody else does, you'll interpret that as them also thinking you're a failure at it. And if someone compliments you, you'll just figure, oh, that doesn't mean anything.
Okay, good. That's really good. Well, you guys took that and ran with it. Good. So what do you imagine are some implicit beliefs that is pretty common to the human experience? I should have asked you that in your groups, but anybody have any ideas? There's a few of, I would say there's a few of them that we all struggle with. Identity? Can you be more explicit? Who I am? Okay. Like, I'm a failure? I'm a success? Okay.
Seems like approval might be a common theme. I think oftentimes we're motivated by needing the approval of others.
Yes.
Even if we don't acknowledge that to
Yes.
ourselves.
So let's say I don't approve of myself, or I don't, what would that mean?
Then that comes back to self-worth, I think.
Absolutely. Yes. So like, do I have value? Am I good enough? That kind of stuff.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it. So can you all identify with those? Am I good enough? Am I a failure? Do I have value? Those are real common implicit beliefs that we all have about ourselves that show up in conflict. So in terms of, for example, the what and the how, let's say we're having a conversation about relationships in this case. And the how of the conversation is based on some implicit belief. So what is the real, if it's based on some implicit belief like I don't have worth, or I'm a failure, or I'm not important, or I'm not good enough, that's the conflict. That's the real conflict that's getting played out with the subject of talking about relationships. That's why the what isn't really usually what's happening. It's the implicit beliefs that are getting played out in how we interact with each other is the conflict. And the other thing that I didn't say about comfort strategies, when we use comfort strategies, we typically think the other person, the conflict is with the other person. The conflict is with me. It's not with the other person. It's how I respond to my own discomfort based on my implicit beliefs that I don't even know is going on all the time. That's the real conflict. Does that make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. That was the profound message of last week, was that the battle is within. It's really me.
Absolutely.
And if I suffer a wound from our relationship, it's probably because I've made that wound myself.
You already have that wound.
Right.
Yes. You're responding to that wound or some belief. Like, I mean, if you don't think that you have worth or value or that you're good enough, you're walking around with a wound. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so somebody could say something to you and could push on that, and then you're reacting to that. Or maybe somebody gives you a look that you have some sort of association with, and then you're responding from that implicit belief. And that's what the conflict is then about. It's that simple. I mean, it's that we can get triggered by that kind of stuff. I mean, how's this? That just something like that. Somebody doing that. Somebody standing up can be somebody can have an association with, and that in belief is get boom. Okay. Really good on implicit beliefs. So the last thing we talked about was seeing other people as the problem. I think we got that one. We do that really easily. So I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to talk about something else, and then we're going to go into repair. Okay? Okay. Okay, there's three people here. And let's say that's Larry and Chris. And here's Andrew. Okay? This is a common way in which we make other people the problem. And I didn't talk about it last week. And that is we triangulate people. So we're talking about triangles. So let's say that Chris and I have a conflict. And instead of going and talking to Chris, I go talk to Andrew. Why do I do that? I'm sorry? Absolutely. That's exactly right. Because it's more comfortable to go to Andrew because the conflict's not with him. The conflict's with Chris. And to go to Chris would be uncomfortable. So it's all driven by comfort. Exactly. So when I go to Andrew, what is it that I want? I'm sorry? Validation. What else? An alliance. Absolutely. What does that look like? What does an alliance look like?
Well, it's going to vary, but if you're on my side, you'll back up what I have to say.
On my side. And how am I going to do that? How am I going to get Andrew to be on my side? I'm going to buy him lunch. I'm going to buy him lunch. And I'm going to tell him my story. And what is the story going to be? You cannot believe what kind of person Chris is and how he responded to me. So what am I saying? What am I asking Andrew to do here by talking to him?
Drive the bus. I threw Chris under.
That's boom. That is perfect. I had not heard that one before, and I'm going to use it, if that's okay. Drive the bus that I just threw Chris under. Exactly. Paul, that's great. Where did you figure that one out? Being in business.
I'm the smartest guy in the room.
So I am asking Andrew to believe that I'm a much different person than Chris is. I'm asking him to believe a lie. And guess what else I'm doing with Andrew? Well, I am, but I'm asking Andrew to do something here that's pretty treacherous, actually. Yes.
I think you're asking Andrew to go and have an interaction with me, possibly to overcome your discomfort of having that interaction with me, possibly.
Yeah, certainly asking him to side with me. I'm trying to create an allowance. I'm asking for validation. I'm asking him to believe a lie. And what happened? What's the threat? If Andrew doesn't agree with me. See, that's the treachery. What's the threat? That's right. And I'm going to go talk to somebody else about Andrew. That's the threat. There's a lot of pressure on Andrew to see it my way, to see it the way that I see it. What is wrong with this? Absolutely everything, but it's what else? I mean, that's global. It's deceitful. It's dishonest. It's manipulative. It's also anti-gospel. I'm asking another human being to believe that I'm not so bad, that Chris is worse than I am. That's anti-gospel. This is bad. This causes tons and tons of damage in relationships and organizations, ministries. It's hurtful, incredibly destructive. Okay, that's all I have to say. Any questions about this?
What if there was more neutral, like a counselor?
Well, if A is smart, like Paul is, he's going to say, well, let's go talk to Chris together. Or how can I help you? I'm not going to take sides here, but I'm going to try to be helpful. How can I do that? Let's help you guys work this out. But the pressure, a lot of people cave to the threat. And people can be really manipulative and really subtle and really nuanced about how they tell their story and how they're the victim and all that stuff. You kind of have to pay attention to kind of the whole thing. What just happened here? You know, the whole picture. What does he want? That kind of stuff. This is incredibly destructive to relationships. Yes, Marissa.
Is it possible to do something like that and not have it like? So I do this with Toby all the time when I have a conflict with someone and I'm trying to process, figure out what the heck actually happened.
And going to him and talking through what happened, what happened, what might have been happening.
Right.
And a lot of times Toby doesn't like taking sides, even if it is my side, because he wants me to be able to get along with them.
Yes.
And so I know that he won't take my side unless if there's something physical going on, then he gets pissed.
Sure.
But if it's just emotional, trying to figure things out, he won't take my side or their side, but he'll listen through, and I'm.
Yes.
So does that compare to that, or is that something?
No, I think that's different. Okay. I think the difference is what is it that I want to happen? In this case, what I want is I want comfort, number one, as Gabe said, and I want to get Andrew to see it my way. I'm not asking for help. Mm-hmm. I'm asking for an alliance. I'm asking for him to side with me against another person. If in your case, you're going and say, help me understand what happened here. Here's what I think happened. Can you give me some perspective? That's a whole different deal. Sure.
Is this qualitatively different from children tattling on their sister to their mom?
It's kind of the same thing. Okay. It's where it starts.
Okay. Got to nip that in the bud.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So here's what we're going to do now. We might go 5 minutes over, but you have a sheet that's called Format for Learning. I'm going to have to get one, but let me borrow yours for just a real quick second. So let's say two things. One is I'm going to break you up into groups again, and I want you to think about a conflict that you had with someone that did not go well, and maybe where you responded disproportionately. By the way, when you find yourself responding disproportionately to a conflict, that's a really good indicator that you're responding in some implicit belief. That's a real good indicator. Just a side note. I'm sorry? Give an example. When Christine is upset with me about something, and like this last 2 weeks ago, I don't even remember what it's interesting how I don't remember the content, the subject. I remember the process, which is not uncommon. I did something for Christine, and I went out of my way to do something for her. I don't remember what it was. And she was upset that I missed this one thing. I didn't do it exactly right, even though I tried really hard. Well, that was a common theme growing up for me. And I got really upset and defensive. I was responding. I got really upset with her and kind of got big and said, well, why can't you just be positive? And I was really defensive. That's responding to an implicit belief that I never could do it right with my dad. Even though I tried really hard, that was what was in play. That would be an example. That makes sense? Okay. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about a conflict that you've had with someone who didn't go well. And typically what we do when we have conflicts with people, we think they're the problem, right? And they think you're the problem. And so you're at an impasse, okay? And you're really hurt. So I want you to think about that conflict. I mean, name it in terms of the subject, but then I want you to think about I want you to go through this questionnaire with your group and answer these questions. And try to stay focused a bit on the questions. And just see what you learn about yourself. Okay? And we've kind of gone through this whole thing by the structure of how I've presented this series. So kind of go through that, work through a conflict, talk about it in your group, okay? And then if someone wants to share, that would be great. If you don't, that's okay too. But if someone wants to share, that'd be cool. Okay. Any questions about that? I'm really more interested in you interacting with each other and doing this way rather than just me standing up here and talking, because I think you're going to learn more by interacting with each other. Okay? Good. Thank you. So no more group stuff here, okay? So how was that kind of working through, just looking at this model, this format here, and kind of running it through a conflict you have and just learning from it? How was that? Was that helpful? Okay. So I talked about a conflict here a minute ago that I had with myself and Christine. So I'm going to talk about that and run this through here. And then if you can ask me any questions you want about that. So the conflict was, at least what I understood the conflict in the beginning, was that Christine was being critical, that she found the one thing that was wrong instead of seeing all the stuff that I did. Okay. That was the conflict in my mind. Okay. So how did I respond to the conflict? I got angry, and I withdrew. Okay. So what did I want to happen as a result of choosing to respond this way? Interpersonally, I wanted Christine to know that I was hurt. Kind of funny, because I was angry. She's not going to, she's bright enough to know that underneath anger is hurt, but I was angry. I wasn't really telling her I was hurt. I was just angry and telling her that she was hurtful. So what happened as a result of choosing to respond this way interpersonally? What do you think happened? Separation. Okay. What happened intrapersonally? Do you know what we mean by intrapersonally? Yeah. Okay. What happened? I put the blame on her. Well, that happened interpersonally. Yeah. Interpersonally, well, inwardly, you're right. I was making her the problem, intrapersonally as well. And I was kind of ruminating. And I was very upset. I guess part of the question I'm asking, what happened as a result of my being angry or withdrawn interpersonally? I was alone. I was all by myself. I had put a wall around myself and I had withdrawn. So what did I believe would happen if I didn't make this choice? If I wasn't angry or withdraw, what did I think would happen? What's that?
You believed it would be true the way you felt about yourself, that you can't do things right.
Yes. And I was correcting her and telling her that she was wrong about that. That's correct. And I wasn't going to go an error like that go. I wasn't going to let it go past it. Correct. That makes sense? She was wrong. I was letting her know she was wrong. What life experiences have influenced my belief? Again, my belief was, even when I try, I can't do it good enough. That's my implicit belief. Now, with a lot of you here, that doesn't really make much difference to me, but there are a few here that it does. But when you're in a relationship with someone who's really important to you, it makes a big difference. When someone tells you you haven't done something right. Right? It shows up. So I had experiences where I would try really hard to do stuff right, and I just couldn't quite get it right. It was always a problem. Not always, but often. So how does what I've learned about myself in part impact my understanding of my responsibility here? Christine is not my problem. I'm my problem. I'm responding to an implicit belief from a painful experience in the past. And she just happened to show up and push on it a little bit. She was just trying to tell me something that was important to her. That's reasonable. That she wanted it done in a particular, I don't even remember what it was again, but that was important to her. And she was trying to have a voice about what was important to her. Pretty simple. Christine was not, the conflict was not with her. The conflict was with me and my implicit belief about a painful experience in the past. And I made a bad decision in responding to that pain that way. I tried to get her to stop doing that. What I really wanted by being big was and being right about it, was I wanted her not to do that again so I wouldn't have to feel that way. So what different options do I now have in response to my understanding of my responsibility? I can go to Christine and say, I screwed up. I messed up. I made you the problem. You're not the problem. Here's the problem. Here's what I was responding to. That's mine, not yours. So, like what I said, when I got big and withdrew, this is what happened. So what do you think happened when I went to Christine and said, I've been thinking about how I reacted to you, and here's what I learned. Here's the truth. You're not the problem. I'm my problem. Here's what I was responding to. It wasn't you. It was this. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? What do you think happened then? That's called repair. Most people don't know how to do that. Most people stay out here until maybe it just kind of goes away, or it's right under the surface, or never gets resolved because they're afraid to talk about it, afraid it's going to go south again. What made this thing separate is that I made Christine my problem. That's usually what happens when people have conflict and they make the other person the problem. It destroys trust and it causes separation. I removed myself. I got big and put a wall around myself. I withdrew. I removed myself from her. I created more pain for myself. Remember, we were talking about strategies and how comfort strategies always bring more pain. Always, always, always. Learning from my own choices, where they come from, what my implicit beliefs are, what the consequences are, taking responsibility for them does this. Making other people the problem tears down trust. Taking responsibility for yourself cultivates trust. If you have trust, you have a lot. If you don't have trust, you don't have much. So doing repair is essentially about learning about my choices, where they come from, what I believe about them, what I want from them, and then talking about it in a way that's honest and taking responsibility for myself with the person that I have the conflict with. That's what does repair. Simple. Very hard to do, but simple. It is taking responsibility for myself is a very vulnerable thing to do for all human beings, but that's what makes it work. What happened was I got to experience grace and mercy from Christine. And that touches my fear that I'm not good enough. It says to me, I don't have to be good enough to get love, to get grace. It touches that very implicit fear. The very thing that I'm afraid of and the pain that I'm responding to, it touches. You see that? Yes.
So, I guess we're just trying to. Well, I guess I asked. Well, I'm just thinking, you know, what if I'm in Christine's shoes?
Yes.
I'm the one responding to the conflict.
Your response.
Well,
you're
not responding
to me.
to the conflict. I'm seeing as you put in your example, you did all this work, you did,
Yes.
and you just ended up missing this one thing or whatever. Is that right or wrong for me to say, hey, you missed this all the time? Was that put you in a position of?
I think it was very reasonable for Christine to say this is important. This was important to me.
Okay.
She didn't do it in a bad way.
I guess it
Yes.
is specifically, but I guess that makes sense.
Right.
Okay.
Andrew.
Well, I want to add a layer of complexity to it. So what if?
Of course.
What if?
I appreciate that. I do.
Let's retell the story.
Okay.
And it sounded like you were out doing errands or something.
I was. I did a bunch of errands. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you take longer than Christine expected, and at first she's frustrated, and then she actually starts getting worried that something may have happened.
Okay.
Okay.
That wasn't the case, but
I know it's not the case.
Okay. Okay.
Just go with me.
I'm sorry. Yes. Okay.
So.
Yes.
So she goes from being angry to.
She goes from being afraid to being angry.
No, she goes from being frustrated that you're late to being fearful.
Yes. Yes.
And you walk in the door.
Yes. Okay.
So now she's activated.
Yes.
And she actually is a jerk to you in that moment.
Yes. Okay.
So in other words,
it would be easy for me to justify myself then.
Yeah. And I think that this is what often happens in relationships.
Yes.
Is that her fear triggers an aggressive response toward you, which triggers your fear and a counter, either withdrawal or aggressive. So now we have a whole nother dance going on.
We have a dance. Yes.
How does that change? I think I know your answer. It's not going to change you're
anything
still responsible. And you may go away and do that work, and you may come back and apologize, and she may not.
That's exactly right.
She still has to do her work.
That's correct. And she may not.
But I think you made a comment earlier to Andrew that that's as good as, I mean, you just have to model it for.
That's correct.
You're just responsible for your own reaction.
That's correct. Yeah.
So it's not that Christine didn't do something that.
In this case, sure.
Yeah. In this scenario.
Right.
You're going, well, no, empirically speaking, she was dismissive or rude or condescending or what she did was genuinely hurtful.
Yes. Sure.
So,
I'm still responsible.
In that scenario.
I'm still responsible. And what's true is my choices actually have more consequences for me than even if she's rude.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. I just give you a bad time. Because I can.
Okay, so I have a quick question. It was kind of already touched on, but
you have a soft voice code.
Okay, I have a question. It was kind of already touched on, but so if in the original scenario that you're talking about, where Christine pointed something out to you and then you blew up from a personal problem about it.
Yes.
If in that situation, like you or Christine, how do you handle the person who's blowing up? like, what do you recommend are ways in order to, like, if you're not having an issue and you're just trying to be like, oh, this was one little thing, it's not a big deal, and the other person's blowing up because they have their own personal issues, what do you recommend are tools or ways in order to handle that situation?
I think it very much depends on the relationship, obviously. But if it's in this case with Christine can say something like, I know you're having a really hard time here. Maybe we can take a break and we can come back and talk about it later.
Okay.
Because you're not doing very well. So I'm going to read some things that I just real quickly, this will take about 2 minutes. It's just some simple practical things to think about. So what I did was it took me about 2 hours to go back to Christine. Okay. Sometimes it can take people never do it. Sometimes it can take 3 days or 4 days. Sometimes they don't do it at all. These are just some practical ideas about how and when to do this. Choose a quiet space to listen to each other. Christine and I have a rule that we do not settle conflicts at night, because we work hard during the day and we're emotionally tired from working with helping people, and we're spent. So we don't resolve conflict at night. And what we do is we have a set time on Fridays and Sundays that we sit with each other, we look face to face with each other, and we listen to each other. And that's what we do. And we usually talk about stuff that happens between us, and we listen to each other. Or I talk and she about how I responded to her, or she talks about how she responds to me. That's what we do. But it's a set time. It's a limited time. If somebody's talking, I'm not interrupting. I'm not listening to reply. I'm listening to understand. I'm letting her know what I hear her saying and wanting me to know.
That's a huge deal about not listening to.
It's a huge deal because it changes everything, and people know it. I'm not listening to give Christine an answer. I'm listening to understand what she wants me to know about her. That's the guidelines that we've set up when we sit with each other. For you guys, you could use this format to go through before you sit down with somebody and talk with somebody, so that you've done some work yourself. Okay? Don't talk about the other person, what they did or what they said or didn't say. Again, communicate what you want the other person to know about you, and be committed to taking responsibility for your choices. Do not blame. Give the other person that you're no different than they are. Those are some basic guidelines about how to do this thing with listening to each other. Any questions? It's not a good idea to do it when you're tired or stressed. It's not going to go well, because this takes groundedness, if you will, to do this. So, because sometimes people are going to say things that are hard to hear, even if they're talking about themselves. Okay? Any questions at all?
Yeah, just a question about, you said you had this, your dad made you feel like you could never do things good enough.
Right.
So, okay. And you, and that was brought out in this example.
Yes.
So you experienced forgiveness, mercy from Christine, and
yes.
you said that helps you
absolutely
heal.
It touches that, because I was vulnerable with it.
But what can you do? I mean, you walk away and you could say, can I ever look inside myself enough and repair this feeling that I've got that's not really true?
That's what I did with Christine. I took responsibility for how I responded to her. I messed up, okay? I wasn't good enough with her. And so what I did is I owned it. I talked about what I was responding to. I wasn't good enough, and she gave me grace and mercy in that context. So I gave myself the opportunity to have this relational experience with her that confronts that belief right there.
So it's something you couldn't do on your own. You would have to have.
Well, I can process it, and yeah, but the best way to, I think, the best way to work with that stuff is to do this with a safe person or the person you've had the conflict with, and do that. Then you have this experience. Oh, I'm okay even if I mess up.
Seems like there's a secondary point to that, which is for the healing that can come about is the necessity for you to receive that. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
To receive the grace.
Yes.
If it's even given.
I have to be vulnerable to receiving it.
Well, you have to be vulnerable to say it, and then you have to be vulnerable enough to receive.
Absolutely.
Receive it.
Yes.
But you also have to. You might not get the chance to even receive it, which
I may not.
Unfortunately, could also negatively compound your implicit belief that you already have.
That's right, and there's risk. There is, but I think that the best thing that I can do is to take responsibility for myself.
Sure.
With the person that I messed up with.
Yeah.
And I have that when I do that.
Fair enough.
All right. Cool. Good question. Good question. Any other questions? I want to thank you all a lot for being here and participating the way that you have. You've been incredibly open and vulnerable and open to learning and engaged in this process. And it's been incredibly helpful to me and to, I think, everybody here. I want to especially thank Andrew for coming because he listens to me and he gives me feedback, and I've learned so much from him. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate him. Thank you all for coming again, and good luck with this stuff. Okay.